let's get started here. It's 8 o'clock. John Landry may be able to join us later on. I will have to end this conference at 9:30 or maybe slightly before because we have a plumber appointment.
Plumber?
A plumber appointment.
Okay.
I'll have to be leaving it after 1 hour, so
Anyway, so
that can't change.
I'd like to welcome you. This is obviously Saturday, October 19th, and we have a number of topics today. And first topic is you don't start to learn your martial art until you have to teach it. And I just want to start out with a comment that Seki, my sensei, made right after he promoted me to black belt. He said, "Now you're ready to learn the art." And I think you could take this phrase and put anything in there in place of martial art.
Right.
Yep. So we'll start off, what is the implication of the statement? If we say to a student, great, you've made it to shodan. Now, are you ready to really learn the art? Which infers, are you ready to teach it? Or do you want to teach? That's another question. So anyone want to start off on this topic, or?
I will, sure. Interesting topic to bring up because I had a conversation earlier this week with a trainer at the gym and made exactly that statement to him. And he looked at me kind of quizzically like, no, wait a minute, didn't you already know that when you got your black belt? And then he thought about it for a little while and realized that that was exactly the same thing for him and the training that he did at the gym. So it took him a while to get to that point, but absolutely. I don't know that we can explain that to somebody who is studying in the Q ranks, because it's not till we actually get up there and go, oh, this is so much different when I have to explain it to somebody, or when I have to watch them and see what's going wrong, or I see them make the mistake that I've been making all along, and oh, that they're doing that because I do it wrong. That I don't know that you can explain that to a Q. I don't know. I've tried. It hasn't worked. It seems to discourage people. But I absolutely agree that you don't start learning it well, and maybe that's the modification that needs to be made to the statement. Don't start learning it well until you have to start teaching it. I'm done.
I would just change that to instead of have to start teaching it until you get to start teaching it.
Yes, yes.
So there's a world of opportunity out there.
Yeah, I think Dave, your statement is correct, because some sensei are very hesitant about allowing even their own black belts to teach the class, for a variety of reasons.
That said, Tom, I agree wholeheartedly with what I heard you say. That teaching crystallizes thinking.
Yeah, I think the difficulty in explaining it to a Mudansha is that they're under you can't tell a floor rank student you're not going to really learn anything until you teach it, because they're just going to walk out the door.
Right.
Because that's beyond, I think we're saying it's beyond their concept level at this point, because they haven't been put in that situation and they haven't had the experience. And so it's just it's like telling Dave, "Good morning, Dave. We're going to have to do brain surgery today." And I know you've watched a few videos, but
You got it down pat.
I haven't done my 7-year residency yet.
Pardon?
I haven't done my 7-year residency yet.
No.
It's, you know, I'm thinking about this, and I sat down with a cup of tea, yeah, a few nights ago and started, taking this, looking at this and trying to come up with something I could contribute or find out what I could learn. And, you know, the idea of, the people that are not shodan, understanding that statement would probably, they wouldn't. I'm thinking about the folks and we have a small class, but we have what, 3 or 4 new,
Yes,
and
yes.
they would never understand that statement. But without a doubt, in my mind, teaching gives you a much deeper understanding of what you're practicing. I mean, it just does. You're basically not receiving, you're giving. And then you watch the results of that. Either it works good on somebody or they pick it up, or if you're teaching it wrong, you pick that up too. But it seems like a pretty much a natural order of things for when say if you're in Shotokan or you're Jujitsu, whatever, you get to the Shodan level, and it's kind of a natural order of things that you want to teach. I'm not saying that everybody looks at it that way, but it just seems that there's a natural progression that occurs there. Now I can start teaching.
I
I-
think that's right.
I'll jump in here with one other observation. I learned more my first 13 years of teaching than I did my first 13 years of taking piano lessons by far. And my students were teaching me as I was working with them, as I was mentoring them. And so there's that. The other thing that's really significant is going beyond just the 13 years. I mean, I've been teaching now, I'm in my 52nd year of teaching, and finishing that up. It's really important not to teach the same year over and over again. You can really easily get stuck if you're not willing to remain open-minded, take what your students have taught you, incorporate it into future lessons. And as you grow as a teacher, you'll also grow in the art. So, and I have met piano teachers and senseis who teach the same year over and over and over again.
Yeah,
I understand that, yeah.
go ahead. Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I've seen I say classroom teachers that initially they're very rigid in how they teach, but if they let and this is another factor, if they let their personality come through, for the most part, they end up doing a better job of teaching, because as Dave and Tom said, when you start teaching, you begin to find all the mistakes you've been making. And the issue becomes, are you going to just chew the students out for doing it wrong and put the blame on them, which isn't going to work in the long run? Or do you just hold on a second, please? Yes?
So, Mr. Blue-Eyed Buddhist, I love
How you doing?
the moniker. What's the story behind Blue-Eyed Buddhist?
Oh, basically, I have blue eyes, which is kind of rare for my race, but and then I like the whole philosophy of Buddhism, and I've done so many different martial arts that
I get it. It's right there on the surface. I should have known.
yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
for clarifying.
Yeah.
Okay.
George, you've already dived a couple spots down in the outline for the things to talk about. How do we handle it when we recognize our own mistakes?
Yeah, that's, you either, one of the hardest things I found, I know, and I'll say this professionally as well as in the dojo, one of the hardest things to admit that you screwed up and you made a mistake. And if you are willing, if you're able and willing to do that, your students will respect you more. And because you're respecting them, you're saying, okay, basically, how do you say it? What I thought was right was wrong, or it isn't working. However you wish to explain it, as long as you're willing to accept the responsibility. If everybody's doing something wrong that you've taught, it's not their fault.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
and I mean, there's
yeah,
that's kind of something too, where there might be more than one right or wrong way, and it might be this thing doesn't work for a certain student.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, there's that variable too.
Yeah.
Something may work for 18 students and not work for number 19. And
Mhm.
That's a valuable lesson that you can learn.
then as a sensei, you have to find a way to get that 19th student on board.
Mhm.
It may be a limitation they have, but you need to come up, if you can, with a workaround. And that's the hard part of being a teacher, is when things go south. I know there've been a couple times as a classroom teacher where I've tried to do something for 2 or 3 weeks and it's fallen flat on its face. And I've had to say, okay, this is not your fault. I screwed up. Any bad grades that you've done on any work, or what have you, these past 2 weeks, we're just going to ignore and we're going to start over. And because that's all you really can do. Uh, um, and that's hard for some people to admit that. Teachers, adults, parents, government officials, to admit when they've messed up. Because it's, we like to, there's some people that like to think they're always right. But anyway, that gets into a whole different ballgame.
George, you said something earlier. I would want to go back and just reemphasize it. How do you recognize that you've done something wrong in the class, taught something wrong in the classroom? And the way it was most obvious for me is when they break up into pairs and are doing something. If I see more than one person doing the same thing wrong,
Right.
it's mine, it's on me.
Right.
I taught them wrong. And I stop the whole thing and say, okay, I screwed up. I can see where I screwed up. Let's redo this.
Yeah. Yeah. If, how do you say it? Whenever you're teaching anything, you have some sort of goal in mind, or you should. Uh, and if they're not getting there with what you're doing, then maybe you need to take a step back and say, am I doing something wrong? Or, as I've done in a couple cases, I've simply turned it over to my class and say, we're having a problem. And they know me well enough by that time that I'm not going to, if they say, Kirby, you screwed up, I'm not going to get upset with the student and say, how can you say that to me? I'm the teacher. Um, because we all mess up in life. It's, you know,
Sensei, there's something else that we could just mention here while we're on the topic of wrongness. There are degrees of wrong. And that is to say, when I first learned ukiyo-toshi, it was just jump, make it happen. Put on your left blinker and down everybody goes. And what I learned teaching is, and I don't remember where we picked it up, but I taught my first year or two without this. A fully assisted ukiyo-toshi is wonderful because it's a confidence builder. And then after they've done one or two fully assisted, they do one or two partially assisted, and then their fifth or sixth one, they're very confidently doing an unassisted ukiyo-toshi. And you go, it's a really quick learn. It's a really quick turnaround. And you could say I was wrong not using the fully assisted and the partially assisted. I didn't know they existed.
Yeah.
And when I learned, it's like, okay, so I was wrong not using this, but I didn't know any better. So that's an example of how as we learn and go along, we discover some things that we can do more efficiently, more effectively, and those are sweet for everybody.
yes.
Well, that's part of
for
the biggest thing of teaching, right? Is to evolve your students to, you know, when everybody learns a move, then very few students get it right the first time, you know.
I know, like as Dave said, teaching the ukiyo-toshi, it was 3 or 4 of my junior high kids that came up with that different way of teaching with a third person behind holding the Tori's belt as he held it, you know, and that made the technique so easy to teach. It no longer took a leap of faith.
We even had somebody not just holding the belt; we had somebody else holding them at the ankles.
Yeah,
now, when I say holding them, we just had fists up here where the fists would come up underneath, so they could literally hang there, and then we could talk.
Yeah,
and then the semi-assisted, we remove the ankle support, and then we go from holding the belt to just 2 fingers in the belt.
right.
And then you let go. Yeah.
And the same concept applies if you're familiar with what we call a sami, which is a scissor around the waist with the legs and then turning backwards towards the person's back side, or you're coming up on their right side. You're turning to your left after you get your left leg up there. And again, getting that third person there to hold the belt initially really makes a lot of difference. And again, this is another thing, you know, we took that concept from the ukiyo-toshi, applied it to the hasami, and hasami was then so much easier for students to learn. I mean, I think our toughest job as sensei is helping them eliminate the fear that gravity is going to work for them or work against them.
Yes, that can be, well, evolving your students should also involve evolving yourself. You know?
Yeah, I mean, and that's hard for some teachers to accept that the students, you know, students can actually give good ideas that will improve whatever they're teaching, and
I think that reflects that you're a good teacher is when your students start showing you things that even you might not have seen originally.
right. And if I think a really good teacher will allow for student input, because as you said, it shows they're interested and they want to do a good job, and they become part of the process rather than just doing it. And that really can improve a student's image of you as a teacher. And of course, it increases your respect for them as well. So because, hey, this 13-year-old came up with a solution that I've been having problems with for the past 10 or 15 years. It happens. So, one of the we're going to segue into question to item number 2, which is, can all black belts teach, or do they want to teach? I always make, and I know it's a false assumption by this time, but I would like to assume that every black belt that I have taught is at some point going to either start assisting in my dojo, which they've already done as brown belts usually, or they may go some distance away, far enough not to compete for my students, and open up their own dojo and spread the art. This isn't a reality.
No.
Unfortunately. So is this a blind trust on the part of the sensei, or we'd like to assume that our students that become black belts will eventually go out and teach on their own? And
well, as hard as it is to get any kind of belt in any kind of art, sometimes once you finally reach a black belt into the art, you realize that not everybody has the ambitions you have furthering the art,
yeah, but they've put in X number of years to get to black belt.
Oh yeah.
Now,
I mean,
goal was
it's crazy though that some people literally get their black belt and then just quit.
right. I mean, maybe it may be a bucket list item for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to put it that way.
That's very true. That's a great way to put it.
But it's a real
It's like a
frustration.
life goal almost, and once they reach that, some people, that's all they needed to reach,
Right. I mean, the question is, it's kind of like the first question. You don't really start learning a martial art until you have to teach it. And the other issue being, can all black belts teach?
Yeah, no, that's
Or do they
not
want
true
to?
either.
It's I mean, to me, it's frustrating because I know as sensei put in for lack of a better word, a hell of a lot of time to getting a student to that point where they are now a black belt. And
Yes.
I could say self-centeredly, I said, okay, puppy, now it's payback time.
Well, that originally, if you were led into a school of real martial arts and that sensei was able to teach you all the way to, black belt or as far as you can go within the art, it was just mandatory, kind of unsaid mandatory, that you were gonna further on that teaching,
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, I know with Seki, and you've heard the story, where he just came up to another first brown and me one night and said, "You're going to take over the Burbank YMCA program." And we said, "We're not black belts." He says, "You are now." And you're going to teach. I mean, there was no discussion.
Yeah. What do you say to that?
Well, the other alternative was, there's a door, but he didn't say
Right.
that was inferred, and and I don't know whether
That almost is like a mafia thing. Offer you can't refuse.
great analogy. I never thought of it that way. But, but and so the issue is maybe has the philosophy of what is a black belt changed?
Yeah.
Or is
That
it getting to
probably
black
has.
belt just another promotion? Um,
I think, when you say that, it depends a lot on that person individually and what that person's goals might be.
yeah. And but
I can tell you for certain, teaching is a different art form than learning.
yes.
And there are many, many different styles of teaching, and it's fascinating to me. Seminars like this next Saturday, we're going to have 7 different senseis teaching in the same room, and an 8th just coming by to watch. And he's 4th degree, but he's not. He likely won't be teaching. And if you watch each of us present individually and then team teach later in the day, you will see 8 very different types of presentations. And that I don't look for sameness. And my other business, I've spun off of a dozen or more piano teachers through the years I've taught. I haven't told them they should. They just decided, hey, this is what I want to do. And some of them are teaching only online class piano. Some of them are teaching all the ways that I've taught them. Some of them are teaching part of the ways that I've taught them that they like best, which could be construed as selfish. But it's funny, one of my adult students learned about the existence of those, and he says, "Oh, Dave's disciples." I said, "Well, that's a little high and mighty to call it that." But what I like to do is observe the other teachers to say, what do I want to borrow from their skill set and make my own, and what are they doing that's working really well, and is there anything they're doing that if I did that, I would want to improve upon it. Sometimes it's often pacing. Pacing is a mistake all teachers make starting out. Going too fast, too soon, or too slow, too long. And it's one of those things that you fall into what works by the experience of finding the pacing that works for the students, the class you're teaching.
Yeah, I think, as you said, if different teachers teach the same stuff differently, and very rarely is there only one way to teach something. And it may not even be that the technique is being taught differently, but how the explanation is different. It's sort of like if I see a student having a problem with a technique, Jujitsu technique, and I've explained it and explained it and explained it and explained it, okay. If I've explained it a couple, 3 times and the student is still looking at me like a sheep lost in a snowstorm, I'll actually say, okay, here's how you do the technique, and I will physically move them through the technique so they get the feel of it, because there are different ways there are a lot of different ways of learning if you get into especially if you get into what I call edu-speak, or is using a lot of educational terminology, okay, or if you're a doctor, it's medical speak, or whatever you want to, whatever profession you're in, you have your own language, and or it's like looking at an insurance disclaimer form and understanding it the first time you read through it. It doesn't happen. But sometimes with students, if you manipulate them physically through the technique, or have them do it to you and you'd say, yes, this is working. No, this is not. Move your hand, move your finger, put it here instead. And if they feel how it works correctly, then you may be successful. And that may be all they need, just being able to teach the technique, is just to have that, how do you say, physical connection with their sensei, or maybe it's a physical connection with an upper belt that's teaching them that a different way to do the technique. So that's there are different ways to teach. And
Yeah, I was gonna say to that too, not to cut you off, but or I forget. There's many ways to the top of the mountain with teaching.
yes. And I used to, Seki, for example, hand throw. Seki used to use a big circle and a big step back to do it. And then one day I ran across Wally J, and he went, oh, just go like this and pivot your left foot back. Same technique, okay? And so I will initially teach it to students with the big movements because they can see the movement more easily. It's hard to see for hand throw, it's hard to see this, but you can see this. Okay. And as they get better, I'll encourage them to I'll say, I want you to make your circles smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually they get it down to, what Professor J called the small circle theory, which is a valid concept. And Seki, when he would do the technique, eventually at times he would just do but he'd say this is the same as this, the same technique. And so you have to find different ways to teach something.
Some of the learning styles might get entered in here also.
Right.
There are people that are auditory learners, others are visual learners, others are kinesthetic. They need to do it to really learn it. And then there's people like Sensei. I know you, like I, took voluminous notes in each class. It's part of knowing your learning style. I knew if I took notes, I could go home and take another hour or two and redo what was done in the class in my mind, visualize. And then I also had a way to access it. So what I learned didn't just fall on the mat and stay there or dissipate in the Ethernet on my way home.
Yeah. So it's like you said, it's auditory, kinesthetic by moving around, or the other one was
Visual.
Okay. And if you can get some students are much better at one than the other.
So maybe an idea is that understanding how that person learns.
Yes.
For one. And then the other factor that I believe enters into it is their physical ability. Just like Sensei Dave was pointing out, 7 or 8 senseis teaching at this workshop. Each has a different style. They do jujitsu, but each have a different style. But the physical ability of each student is quite different, and one can be a great contrast to another. It can be all the way to a disability that a student has, or it could just be that they have a problem moving a certain way. So, I think there's something to look at there too.
Yeah. I mean, you have to look at what the student is capable of doing physically. If you've got one arm in a sling, you can't expect them to do well, they could do a corkscrew if the other hand's strong enough. But there are some holds that require well, even shoulder lock takedown could ultimately be done with one hand, but that would have to be really creative, and your uke would have to really cooperate. But you have to be able to modify what you're teaching to their physical abilities.
Right.
But that's, and these are all challenges for someone who's you would like to have become a sensei.
Some disabilities aren't readily apparent.
No.
Mentioned before, I work with a 21-year-old who is, and he'll be at the seminar Saturday, who is stalwart, strong, tall, and the spatial skills are just not there. To the point where if I want him to go right, I'll tell him left, and he'll go right. I've learned that it's kind of ridiculous to go to that extreme, but there the way around that, the workaround is the kinesthetic. To him have an uke, I have an uke, and as I do it, he stands beside me with his uke in front of him and does exactly what I do the way I do it. So he can see it and he can feel it. And it's while he's doing it. If I demonstrate it and then say, now go do it with your uke, and he takes 5 steps and goes across the mat and then starts to work it, he's going to get something backwards or everything backwards, and be off in a different technique altogether if he even completes anything. So the workaround on that is to have it done simultaneously, and that seems to help a whole lot, make a big difference in his learning.
Yeah,
but it's serious. It's almost like spatial dyslexia, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. The one of the problems that exists in the densho that I have from my own notes, and it's the 2 most common problems for those
Left and right.
is that sometimes I will write down right instead of left, or left instead of right, or clockwise instead of counterclockwise. So I usually say, if something isn't working, check my instructions, and if it says left and it isn't working, try right. And I've gone through the densho probably several times, and I think I've gotten most of those, whatever you want to call them, mistakes resolved, but I have no doubt there's some that are still in there.
Sensei, I got to jump in here. I was a Nidan, well into my Nidan, before I realized that saying clockwise and counterclockwise is not enough. You have floor clockwise and floor counterclockwise, and then you have wall clockwise and wall counterclockwise. You got 2 very different planes, and then you got the angles in between. But it's when you define things that way, especially in your notes, floor counterclockwise, there are techniques that you're doing floor counterclockwise while your arms are moving wall clockwise, and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, it usually had to do either with the direction usually had to do with the direction I was turning. I'd say turn to your left, and it should be turn to your right.
I see.
I'm telling you what to turn. I'm just telling you to turn in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
That was one of the things we did that for several years at your camp. The big book review and going over and we'd say start at number whatever. We get about 3 in, and then we're saying, okay, so where was this 3rd arm I was supposed to have?
Yeah. The notes are there, and some people have said, you shouldn't be putting this information out there. And my response was, unless you're fairly high rank wise, you're not going to be able to follow. This is a foreign language.
Yeah, it is.
And I just ran into someone asked me, why do you put all the information out there that you do on your website? What if some person who is questionable morality decides to use it? And my response was, it requires too much. It requires technical skill to become proficient at this. And I'm not worried about a questionable person becoming competent at it, because odds are they won't have the patience to become competent to where they could use it. It's kind of like many years ago, we had an incident on the high school campus where a teacher found a .22 bullet under a student's seat. And so that student got called in. He had in one of his shirt pockets, he had 5 or 6 rounds. And they asked him, who is it for? And he told them it was for so-and-so who had brought a gun to campus. The gun turned out to be .32 caliber. Well, needless to say, they both got into trouble. But you really, sometimes things don't connect. But okay, let's get back to topic here. Is there anything we can do to, because it does take a lot of ambition and a particular personality and drive to get for a person to want to be a sensei. Because if you start up, we all know from those of us that are teaching from personal experience, the first year or two are really tough. Now, Bill Fromm and I were really fortunate. We walked into a YMCA program where the class was offered for free. We had 30 or 40 students. Eventually, there was a 6-month waiting list to get into the class. So we had a guaranteed clientele, basically. But I know if you're starting, if you're starting fresh, it's hard. And you run into a lot of problems. And I don't know if any sensei, let's say Thomas is going to go out. Thomas says to me, I want to go out and start my own dojo. And I'm saying to myself, great, fantastic. I'm happy he's getting out there. He's going to take the risk. Okay, what's involved in the risk? And do we really go through that with our students? Do we give them that reality check? Or do we just say, go forth and prosper? Which isn't realistic. Or go forth and multiply, whatever the saying really is. And then Thomas runs into all these challenges. Now, this is assuming he's working through a community agency. If he's starting his own business, that's a whole different ballgame. That's too much work. And I understand that. I mean, I have a great respect for anyone who can open their own private dojo and make it, which means they're in business for more than a year. Because if you go into business for yourself and you're still in business after 1 year, you're probably going to be okay, unless something horrible happens in the world, such as a pandemic or something of that sort, or a massive hurricane that eliminates the building you're in, or what have you. But how do we? Is there any way to get a black belt to want to teach? I mean, yes, we can have them teach in our dojo. There may be times when we have them, as I've done. Michael Language is essentially actually teaching my dojo now, and he's doing a reasonably good job. The class is very slowly getting bigger. How do we give a black belt or a potential black belt this reality check and still let them know we are in support of their effort?
George, I think you're describing a problem that businesses have. So I'm retired now, but the IT work that I did, in management meetings, we would discuss this quite a bit. We had people who are very, very competent at their technological skills. And it's the old joke of, oh, you're so great at this. I'm going to take you out of that, put you in a position you have no training in whatsoever, and expect you to be competent, make you a manager. But that's not what they want to do. They want to do the programming. And we've got people who come into the martial arts. They want to train to do martial arts. And some of them don't want to teach. They want to do the martial arts. And I understand that from my day job, what I used to have. There were people who really, really enjoyed the technical aspect. They didn't want to be managers. They didn't want to have to take care of all this other stuff. They really enjoyed the technical. Don't take me out of that and make me do something I don't want to do. And we've got students that do the same thing. They want to come into class and do martial arts. They don't want to teach. I don't know that you're going to get past that. Some of them, my best and most enthusiastic students, really don't want to teach.
Okay. And
Yeah,
One of the ways to inspire is with your own enthusiasm. If they see you really enjoying the teaching process, they kind of like, I want to do that. That looks like something I would like to consider. I became a drummer in a rock and roll band for 10 years, and starting in college. And it was not full time. It was part time. We were the most average band you could imagine, and I was the most average drummer you could imagine. But it didn't stop us from getting a lot of gigs and making a lot of people happy. The reason I became a drummer is because when I looked at bands, the drummer seemed to be having more fun than anybody else, and I wanted that. So I worked and earned the money to get the drums, and had a blue satin flame Schlegelin drum set, and I had what I lacked in talent. I made up for in equipment, but the enthusiasm is what drew me to it.
okay, and I agree. You know, it's there are people who do what they do extremely well, but they don't want to move up to what we would perceive of as the next level.
Yeah.
My daughter, who, when she worked for Walmart, they eventually made her night manager, and she tried a couple times to become store manager, but because of and I forget what the term is when relatives get relatives jobs.
Nepotism?
Nepotism. Because of nepotism, she was passed over twice, and at that point she said bye. But that she enjoyed that managerial position, learned a lot from it. And she was the type of manager that, she didn't just say, fix this and do that. If she saw one of her subordinates having a problem, she would get in there and help the subordinate do whatever they're and teach them how to do it well. And so every job she's had since then, her managerial skills have helped her move up the food chain, so to speak. And so maybe part of it is that if we can get a black belt to assume more and more responsibilities in the dojo, that includes maybe teaching a few classes without you being there. And they develop the self-confidence, it might get them to say, well, maybe I'd like to try this. Because I know Thomas has been in this position. I'm in this position where we've had to turn our dojo over to someone else to teach. And it's a hard decision to make. Until you have in a position where you have to make that decision, you don't know how hard it is. Because this is your child, so to speak. Uh, and now you're casting your child off into the world and hoping they can walk on their own. Um, uh, but the issue is, is there a way to instill this or gradually instill this in a black belt so that they may actually say, okay, I'm willing to take the risk and try something? Yes, Ned, you had your hand up. You don't need to, you can speak up. You don't need to wait.
Yeah, I we have a totally different approach, and I would think that maybe this approach you'd see in other schools. I'm not sure. You tell me. But my sensei calls our school a teaching school. Okay, we teach jujitsu to people who will eventually teach it. And the way we deal with that is there's a lot of one-on-one. We have people working with each other in groups of 2 or 3. And basically the students, no matter what their rank, teach each other. Okay. And of course, we'd supervise them, make sure that they're on the right track. But the experience of teaching is, comes early on. I remember when I was a white belt in Jujitsu, I had maybe about 8 or 9 years of judo behind me. And with after the first week, my sensei asked me to teach judo to the class. And I swear, Sensei Kirby, I couldn't put 2 words together because I've never taught. Okay. And just the experience of teaching, it goes beyond just teaching the jujitsu. It does wonders to your character. And by the time we're into the art, maybe a few years, the teaching would come more natural to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a possibility.
Ned, you put something, a memory in my head I don't think of very often, but I'm laughing thinking about it. When I started learning martial arts and my first black belt's karate, not jujitsu. That came along later. Any white belt that came in, I'd already been teaching for decades on the keyboards. Any white belt that came in behind me was fair game for me to work with and teach after class if they'd stay. So I was teaching other people self-defense as a white belt. No doubt making a lot of mistakes. No doubt being a little more confident than I probably should have been. But I know teaching. Both my parents are teachers. It's in my blood. So it's like I couldn't help myself. When I had that yellow, it was like, oh, great. Now the white belts can at least see I'm a belt above them.
Mhm.
But I would be humble about it. I wouldn't be arrogant. I would say, can we work together? And I'll show you some of the things we learned in previous classes. And sometimes they would learn they could approach me. So it was just one of those things. I'm laughing thinking about what those early attempts must have been like, and I'm glad nobody got them on video.
Well, I wanted to mention that I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's very hard to get your blue belt in that art. And sometimes it takes fellas 5 years even, and this can be the same in many other arts too. But what I wanted to say to that is sometimes those arts that do take like 5 years just to go up one belt, sometimes them upper belts above the white belts are able to teach, because it's a different kind of level of, not like this art is better than this art or anything like that, but it's like a level of commitment that you have to take just to get one belt, and sometimes, like blue or purple belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they end up being better teachers because they've sat back and learned different ways of their sensei's teaching that might work better for other students, you know? And that's the way they approach things, or they figured out their own ways because it's such a meticulous art, you
That
know?
is a very true statement. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. If your subject matter becomes easy to you, then as a teacher, you're much more likely to have pacing issues and expect students to be able to do things sooner than they're ready or able. And if the subject matter came more difficult, you weren't a natural, you had to work really hard to learn it, it definitely makes you a better teacher. Or it can
Yeah.
contribute toward it because you realize how challenging it can be and is for other people. And you respect that on a level you wouldn't if you were a natural.
But there
Yeah.
are very few techniques that Seki taught that were I would classify as difficult to do. Okay. The real exception was Hanigoshi, or inside sweeping hip throw. I could not even begin to get the concept of that down or even remotely do the technique until after I was a second-degree black belt.
Oh, really?
And
Oh.
it just continually stumped me. It is still my least favorite technique. However, I know how to set it up properly. I can teach students what to do and where their legs has to connect and how it has to connect, and they can do it like that.
Sensei, you
Do
mentioned this
do you think
before.
that's a body thing with you, Sensei, maybe?
I think it's up here.
It's a mental thing? Okay.
I'm sure it is. Since you've mentioned this before, and it's interesting because Hanigoshi came very comfortably for me. Harai Goshi did not.
Yeah.
And what I eventually learned is the reason that Harai Goshi wasn't working for me is that I was not putting my hip at their belly button. I was putting it more across, and I was starting to do or attempting to do a Harai Goshi with one cheek on their right thigh or their right leg, and the other cheek on the other side of them. And that way, you're not going to have near an opportunity to sweep that leg. As soon as I started to do the Harai Goshi different from the way I was doing the Koshinagi, and put my hip at their belly button, boy, Harai Goshi got real easy, real
Yeah.
quick. So it was a technical difference, and it was the way I was originally working on it. What was the problem? So it's interesting. You mentioned about Hanigoshi, and I found that one to be very natural. And Harai Goshi, I was years on that, years and years before I made that breakthrough.
Yeah. For the Koshinagi or hip throw, no one ever explained it to me, but eventually I said, I figured a way to teach it very easily. And this started in the journey. I say, look, you've got two cleavages, or some of you have two cleavages. One is on your chest for females, and for guys, you also have a cleavage in your butt. Now, if you place your butt cleavage right on their right thigh when you're coming in for a hip throw, you want your cleavage there. Then that gets then your hip will automatically be blocking their hip.
Yeah.
And once they, it's a gross, it's awkward to explain it to people at first because they don't realize there's a cleavage back there. But it's a lot politer than saying the crack in your butt needs to be resting in the middle of their thigh.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it,
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Sensei, I've got to leave. I want to thank you, everyone, gentlemen, Sensei Dave, Tom, Blue Eye. I look forward to our next session. Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for being
joining.
here.
Have a good weekend, sir.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated.
But anyways, it's sometimes it's not what you're saying, but how you're saying it. Because they can laugh at the word cleavage once they connect the dots. Pardon the bad pun, but so you how you teach and how you explain things can sometimes make a technique very easy to do or very difficult to do. And I used to have a long explanation for how to do a hip throw. And as Dave said, that your cheeks need to be in the right place. And even using the word cheeks, sometimes students would get confused because they're thinking,
No,
they're thinking of these cheeks up here, and you're referring to the other cheeks, but once they get the term, it's something they can laugh at, and yet it's still meaningful. And people somehow tend to remember those things a lot better than saying, well, you want to have your hip out, just sticking out just beyond his hip,
Mhm.
because you can't see that. You can't even feel that. But when their thigh is between your cleavage or between your cheeks. That's a pure feel concept. Okay. And sometimes the hard part is finding acceptable terminology that will explain something that other people, once they visualize it, it sticks in their mind.
Sensei, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I've got to tell you, sometimes I go to other schools and I see the way that other instructors teach, and sometimes I leave there with an epiphany of, like terms I could use to make the throws
Yes.
so much better. And I just want to thank you for that one, because for decades I've been telling people, put your hip outside of your opponent's hip, but I think that one will make it stick a lot better, and and people can visualize it in a different way and possibly make those throws more successful. So thank you very much. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I never heard it explained like that. So yeah.
It is kind of
I
blunt.
mean, it is, the word alone, cleavage, is funny, but you know, it makes a lot more sense though too, where that's when you switch your hip, that's where it needs to be.
Yeah. And you can add to that, just make sure that your waist is below their waist.
Mhm.
That's the other key for successful hip throw.
Yes.
Those things, if those two things are in place, you can throw a person. I mean, I've done it even with it put both me and another student in the hospital. At least I walked out the same night. He outweighed me by at least 100 pounds and this is when I was young and dumb. And Seki said, I want you to do a Harigoshi on him. And I said, he's way too heavy. And Seki said, do a Harigoshi on him. So I did, being young and dumb. And he ended up landing flat on his back. And with all that, what I will refer to as male pregnancy weight, he actually ended up injuring his back. And paramedics had to take him away on a backboard. But
And you feel bad when that happens because you were
yes.
part of it, and you go, I didn't intend that.
I mean, I had torn shoulder muscles from the throw. It was a Moroto Seonagi, two-handed shoulder wheel throw, with a hip sweep. And so I even changed. I do not teach for Moroto Seonagi. I will not come up under the person's collar to do it. I will reach this way with a fist down, so that when I do the throw, rather than pulling, I'm pushing. And I found that works a lot better for me.
How tall are you, Sensei?
I'm 5'9".
5'9", okay. So
Yeah.
you're a pretty tall guy. See, I'm 6'4", and
You serve meals
learning
during your
learning to get my hip underneath other people's hips was very hard for me.
Yeah. Well, if you're tall, if you're significant, yeah, that's why the judo throw, we're getting off topic here,
Yeah.
but judo throw, judo has weight height divisions for competition. You're not going to see a 5'4" person going out against someone like you.
Yeah.
It isn't going to happen.
Right.
If that 5'4" person has their brains organized, they're going to be able to throw you.
No, I
A
know.
lot
I
easier
was
than you
lucky enough to have like training partners once in a while my height close
Yeah.
to, but the guys that weren't, it was very
Yes,
difficult,
that's
you know.
why. That's why.
Yeah.
I used years ago. I had two upper belts. Uh, they each stood 6 feet 15 inches, and we jokingly said if we were thrown by one of them, they would serve meals during the flight because it took so long to get to the ground. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
but that's that's another thing. If a if you have a astute black belt who stands 6 foot something, it's going to be more difficult for him to teach
Yes. It
simply
is.
because he is so tall.
Yes.
And
Like a lot of
that's
moves that work really good for me are definitely not gonna work the same for a guy that's shorter, you know.
right, definitely.
Yeah.
I won't argue that one bit, which is a whole other issue.
Yeah, it's a whole nother issue when teaching as well, because you really have to factor in, you gotta throw away what your favorite moves were just for you.
right. I mean, when I teach, I will not choose the highest ranked student to be my uke. I will choose someone who's close to my weight and height
Mm,
because it's easier for me to demonstrate the technique.
that's a great
I mean, if you're teaching,
that's a great thing
you want to have the
break down.
ideal attacker. For some attacks, their height and weight doesn't matter. But
Right.
particularly for judo type throws, it's a real asset.
I'll tell you something that's kind of funny. I have a student who told me, I didn't witness this, but he told me about it, and he very easy to visualize. There's a road rage incident where people were cutting each other off, and one of them pulled out and pulled off to the side of the road. So the other one pulled his car in front of him, and the one behind got out of his car first and was moving towards the car in front of him. Well, the guy in front opened his door, got out. He was 6'8", and the guy had gotten halfway to his car, just turned around, went right back in his car, and drove off. Like,
I mean, that's a reality check. I mean,
no problem here, no problem. So blue-eyed, you might have an advantage in that you just don't have to even throw a punch or a kick.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I've been able to just, talk my way out of a lot of things just because of my size,
Yeah, it's your physical appearance, and this is another thing, another total issue. Your physical appearance, and this is regardless. I mean, height is one factor, but how you appear to your opponent in a street situation can make all the difference in the world as to whether or not you're going to end up with a physical confrontation or not.
Yeah.
One of my
I
favorite
mean, if you look
musicians is
vulnerable, period, doesn't matter if you're big or small.
One of my favorite musicians is a guy named Alan Parsons. I've met him on 5 occasions and talked with him. I had some of his music that he didn't have, and so I shared it with him backstage in concerts. He looks, if you want to look him up in Google, especially in his youth, he looked like the devil reincarnate. He just had that look on his face like, oh, I don't want to mess with that guy. And he's a puppy dog. He's kind and polite, but the look on his face, yeah, stop a clock.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm an artist of many things, and I like tattoo art as well. And I have tattoos all over, even on my face, and I go to church, and I'm really a very nice, humble guy, I'm not some kind of terrible person just by the way I look, maybe, or whatever.
Well, that's because we judge. I'm going to mention this to you. Yeah, I've been watching your eye. You've got really descriptive eyes in terms of I say I'm not going to. What's your first name again?
Dustin.
Dustin?
Yeah, we've talked before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's your eyes. How do you say it? I mean this as a compliment. Are an entry into what you're thinking, and some people that's really obvious, and for some people it isn't. And the way your eyes were moving, I've had a couple of students when I taught high school and junior high who were big time gangbangers, and we didn't have to say much to each other. I could tell by their eye eye position, how they were looking or squinting, what they were thinking. And I could look back at them and we would have this conversation without saying a word. And I think that's maybe one reason we got along. But, a, a person's physical appearance and facial expressions are really important in terms of your presence in any situation. A smile does wonders.
Yeah.
But it can mean many different things depending on how your eyes look. Okay, so let's get away from that topic now. Let's get back to okay. So our issue has been, do black belts want to teach? Can they teach? And is there anything else we want to say on this topic, or because I think we've covered everything here.
I think we covered that it's gonna come down a lot to that teacher and that student's individual goals.
Yeah, and I think it's you have
Coming
to
to
look
work
at
together
yeah,
as one,
the
maybe.
students their individual goals, their capabilities.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just that we as sensei have to recognize what those are and their limitations. It's like dealing with anyone else, whether they be a family member or employee or whatever.
Yeah. And
You
and
have
like
to,
you said, with limitations, maybe figuring out a way to raise those within students.
yeah. I mean, and to maybe try to build their confidence where they are willing to maybe try things even within your dojo, have them teach a technique, have them teach a half hour of your class, or have them teach the warm-up throws, or have them teach the whole class.
Yeah.
And or
That's
have
a
them
great point. That's a
just
great point to
yeah,
let them get their feet wet,
right. And that way, and then they can decide, it gives them a better opportunity to decide what they maybe want to do. Because I think who said it, some may be fine with teaching in your dojo, but they don't want to go outside and do it on their own. And
Yeah, there's so many factors.
yeah, I mean, you can't. I mean, I've had to learn to accept that, as frustrating as it is to me. I can't be like Seki and say, okay, Dave, you've been here for 3 years.
I mean, it's different times, sensei, as well.
Yes, it's a different time. Yeah. But it was a different time 20, 30 years ago, too.
Yes.
I couldn't tell a student, okay, I couldn't say to Dave 20 years ago, Dave, you're now shodan. You're going to go teach at the Appalachia YMCA because they
Yeah.
need someone to teach their jujitsu program, which they don't have yet. And then Dave says, how do you spell that word? Anyway, yeah. And it is frustrating to me, but that is a reality. And I think maybe what we have to do is just realize what our students' capabilities, abilities, willingness is, what their goals are. And if all they want to do is be a black belt, then that's, you hope they'll stick around so they don't forget what they've learned.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I hate to say that's a sad commentary, but
I mean, the reality is too, Sensei, if you think about Mike Tyson, he had a great teacher in Customato, right? But Customato wasn't like a heavyweight champion or a black belt in the art per se, but he knew how to teach
right.
the art. And he was a great teacher,
Yeah. And there are some people that are great, that's their strength is to teach. Other
Yes.
martial artists, their strength is to compete.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Other martial artists, their strength may to be a strong supporter of the class or to be a strong supporter of the sensei. Go ahead, Dave.
There's many roles that can happen within a
yes.
dojo. Yeah.
And to put a play on words, it's how many roles can you get in the package? Okay. Okay. So now we can all get our buns in gear and get rid of that cleavage. Anyway. Okay. I better stop before I get myself in trouble with you using words in different ways. Okay. And Dave and I engage in that once in a while, and it gets to be some of our emails become really absurd.
Eventually, one of us just gives up.
Pardon?
Eventually, one of us gives up and just stops.
Actually, one of us gives up. That's right. Or say this has got to stop. But anyway, so it's getting on towards it's 9:29. Do we want to get into the next topic? Because I've only got like 10 minutes here, which is what makes a good sensei or a dojo. I don't want to just allocate 8 or 9 minutes to that because
we can start there next week.
well, yeah, we can start there next week.
Next time.
But I think we had a pretty good discussion. We did go off track a few times, but we brought it back. And I think that's about it right now. Is anyone want to put in any other words of wisdom? Dave, you have a seminar coming up
Next Saturday.
Next Saturday.
Right. It's a black belt banquet the night before.
Black belt banquet the night before.
We get ourselves on the same page. Then the seminar runs from 8:30 to 5:30.
Right.
I have them bring their own brown bag lunch so that I don't have any complaints about the food. And I serve a lunch that I get from a local restaurant, and I have it delivered for the sensei so that they've flown in. I'm not going to ask them to brown bag something when they've flown in. And then we have a black belt banquet after the seminar that evening,
Okay.
and decompress.
Where is this at, Dave?
This is outside of Tampa, Florida. It's in the town of Brandon, not to be confused with Bradenton. Bradenton's 35 miles south. It's Brandon. We're 13 miles east of Tampa.
Okay.
And we have it at Center Place, and Center Place is a beautiful community center with all kinds of beauty outside. I have to sometimes draw the curtain so that people don't get distracted by the lake and the boardwalk and all kinds of other things. So we're fortunate to have the facility, and they're fortunate to have us earn some bucks for them. Last year, we brought in $1,715 for them. This year, my concern is it's an election year, and that brings down participation. And local businesses, a number of them have mentioned the issue with that. And the other thing is we just got through a 100-year hurricane with 100-mile-an-hour winds blowing right through Brandon, dotted with tornadoes on the northern eye wall of this Milton, Hurricane Milton.
Were you hit with that at all, Dave?
We have 5 grandfather oaks, and fortunately they're all still standing. They have great wind resistance. One oak is missing an arm and a leg, but it's still standing stalwart. And my chainsaw will be attacking that later this afternoon. But anyways, there are people that would have attended the seminar, I'm convinced, that are still up. They're still flooded out. They're still dealing with heavier issues. And so I was hoping this was going to be bigger than last year, and I may get surprised, but we got those 2 elements working against us. And a small class, if it's going to be small, is still very effective and still very fun.
Yeah.
Important thing is they come in one way and they leave empowered. And that's the operative word, empowered.
Okay. So hope you get a good turnout. And next
I
month.
just want to say thank you guys for having me on, and it's always awesome to just talk martial arts with other guys that love martial arts.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Anyway, so we'll see you all on, I guess it's November 2nd is the first Saturday in check. First Saturday in November. Yes. November 2nd. And then we meet again on the 16th. And then in December, we only have we only meet on December 7th, which is, I believe that's actually Pearl Harbor Day.
Yes.
So anyway, so that's the only meeting we'll have in December, because Santa Claus gets pretty busy. So, anyway, hope you have a good weekend, and
Thank you all. Appreciate what you've shared and learned from you.
I don't know what the bridge is, but it's one of the pictures my daughter took on our Mississippi River trip this
nice.
last summer. Well, actually New Orleans, but she occasionally takes scenic shots, and she does a good job of it. So that, in case you're wondering where that is. And we had the sun moved, so it'd be right above that tall building. So have a great weekend, and thank you very much for participating. And we'll see you in 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so take care. Don't do anything dangerous. Good luck on the seminar.
Thank you, sir.
Let me know how it goes.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's about it. And Ned, have a good weekend as well.
You too. Thank you, Sensei.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks, guys. See you.
Bye-bye.